Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, officers, councillors. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit Standards and Risk Committee. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. No, everyone is here.
Thank you. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting are deferred to the end of the meeting because they're not here.
Sorry, Chair. I believe Councillor Wilson had a correction in the fact that Councillor Glowett was present at the last meeting, right? Yeah.
And that will be...
Yeah, that will be reflected in the minutes.
Okay. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have a pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest in any of the items we'll be discussing this evening? No. No. Good. Thank you. Public question time. I believe we have one. Mr. Bain.
Here we go. Good evening, Chairman, Committee. I submitted a question which is really quite complicated, but in essence I'm just asking whether the decision to renegotiate the loans which were negotiated in 2018 are as good as indicated in the paper which is in front of the councillors this evening.
Okay. Do you have the printed answer?
I have the answer, yes, sir, and I'm very happy with the answer that I've been given.
Okay. Do you have a supplementary question?
I do have a supplementary question.
I thought you might.
I would like the council to consider the following. The figure of 12.5 million, in my judgment, is highly questionable. It is not all gain. I think the council has done well to obtain a reduction in the rate, which was not obvious from the agreement that I have a copy of. I think it overlooks a number of things. I recognise there is an interest saving in the income and expenditure account from this particular move to increase the capital repayments and correspondingly reduce the interest payments. But I think that should be understood by all councillors that in fact this is a gain and should not be, people should overlook the fact that this has happened and should look at the requirement to cut costs in a sensible way. I ask what happens between 2052 and 2062 if the assets are not sold, where in my judgment there will be a significant cost to this council greater than the £12.5 million apparently being suggested as a saving when you look at the long-term rate of interest over many, many years. I believe that few of the assets could be sold because at best they are probably secondary. The majority have a yield above 2.88%, so who in their right mind would be selling assets to repay debt at a lesser rate? I asked a question about the MRP, and I understand that over the life of the loan, the MRP would not be altered, but recognising the loan has been reduced to 30 years, the impact will be felt earlier at a greater level than would have happened previously if the MRP had been run over the 40 years of the loan. I'm also anxious, and I would like the council to consider whether in fact this demonstrates a lack of governance. This council has been here before. In 2016-2017, the intention was to borrow all the money in relation to the retail assets at a fixed rate over a long period of time at rates of around about 2.59%. The chief executive, in her wisdom, chose not to follow that agreed policy in the council and adopted a policy of borrowing short-term at rates which were below 2.5. But as we know, the rates have subsequently increased beyond 5%. So at the current time, the council is suffering a negative position in terms of the funding costs associated with these acquisitions. And I would suggest to the council that this particular renegotiation should be submitted for review by the Performance and Finance Committee, Scrutiny Committee, because I think it's unacceptable from the point of view of a resident that this sort of issue is delegated to an officer without it actually being considered by the council and, if necessary, approved by the council. So the outcome is predicated on two things. One, lower interest rates, particularly in the period 2052 to 2062, asset disposals, which I suspect are probably unlikely, and I think that there was always the agreement, there was always the facility in the agreement for early repayment. So I do ask, why now? Why didn't the council consider, if there are to be asset disposals, coupling the asset disposals with a repayment? So I think it's a statement of fact, but factually incorrect in terms of the effect on the council finances. So I'd like the council to consider what I have said, because I question, A, what is being said, and B, why it is being done.
Excuse me. Thank you. As I have said many times, I'm not an expert in accounting, but I believe we do have people in the room who are. And if they have or wish to make a statement in response to what you've said, I would invite them to do so.
Thank you, Chair. The decision was brought to us actually by Phoenix to talk about it through our Treasury advisors. We did think long and hard about where we're going with the process, and it does represent a coupon rate reduction as well as a reduction in the term of the loan. It is wrong to assume that these loans are linked to our assets, as in underwritten by our assets. They're not. We borrow based on our underlying ability to raise tax, which is where we can raise the money in those processes. The reduction, yes, we expose ourselves potentially to a higher level of repayment, but we do have a lower rate of interest on it. The MRP remains unchanged because that's based on our capital financing requirement and our underlying need to borrow. So it's not directly linked against any loans we have. Ms Walsford probably give you more detail on the technical side, if you're okay.
Mm-hmm. So we have of the capital programme, you've got funding and financing. So if we finance it by borrowing and then fund it by your internal borrowing, then your external borrowing. So we're not required to link loans to assets at all because we've got the capital financing requirements. So we can pick and choose what our loan portfolio looks like that best suits our requirements in line with our liability benchmark, which will be explained more in the strategy, in the budget papers. So that remains unchanged because that's linked to the capital spend, the MRP. The loan was linked to what cash requirements we needed at that particular time. What happens in 2052-62? Anybody's guess. We don't have a crystal ball, but we're looking at the portfolio, the loan portfolio as at now, and what's advantageous to us over that period. I think we'd have been wrong not to have considered a £12.5 million interest reduction. Even though we've got higher capital repayments, even if we need to short-term borrow for that, there is still a net benefit to the revenue account each year for this reduction in interest rate. So it is something we considered. The governance side, we discussed it at length with our lead portfolio finance, the leader, the chief execs. We had lots of discussions around it and with our advisors. We did negotiate. The original proposal that came to us, we rejected, and they came back with a different one. And then we negotiated a little bit better on the rate as well. So it was a long process and wasn't just a real snap decision. So we have got that backing from those relevant councillors as well.
Thank you. If I could just add something, I'm not going to be talking accounting here, but it was a political decision, I think, back in 2016 when if you look at the minutes of the council meeting, that approved the purchase. As you said, the finance was based on the Public Works Loan Board and, as you said, the 2 point whatever it was % interest rate at that time. The council then, and there are no members present, there are no officers present who were there, who are here now that were there then, they decided to go for short-term loans. I do not know why, I cannot find out why from the documentation, but it happened. So your question is predicated on events taken in the past for which there are no people present now. Yes, please do.
I might be able to help you there. In terms of why the council did not do what was basically agreed by the council committee, the councillors, was because the chief executive at the time quite sensibly understood that interest rates were going down. And it was her belief that she could support services more readily if she created a profit from the notional rate which the council had factored in of about 2.5% against the rate which was actually being paid. And I wrote to her in September 2018, I have a copy of a letter dated from her the 1st of February 2019, where she recognised that what she was doing was actually contrary to what had been agreed. I won't call it cheating, but basically it was manipulation. And clearly the interest equalisation reserve was built up to 7.5 million. But what didn't happen was, in 2021, when Mr. Roberts came in, I wrote to him and said, lock in the rates and you will look like Warren Buffett. I didn't get a reply when rates were less than half of 1%.
Shame, but there it is, and here we are. Thank you for your question. I've asked if you have a supplementary to your
No, I was waiting to hear what Councillor Cope had to say.
Can we come in on this, specifically on this issue?
Why not?
The point I'm struggling slightly to understand is why we're effectively, in layman's speak, front-loading this loan slightly, and that will increase the repayments we need to make year on year in the short term. That will increase our short-term borrowing. Why does that not hit on the MRP? I don't understand that.
So MRP is purely on the capital financing requirement, which is linked to the capital spend. Your physical borrowing and loans are separate. So you can borrow up to your capital financing requirement, but you can borrow for the portfolio as a whole, not related to specific assets, which is why we've got a combination of different lengths of loans. And we've got internal borrowing, so we haven't externalised all that borrowing as well. So we've got a real mixed portfolio of durations and types of repayment: short-term loans, long-term loans, and market loans. Happy to have a separate conversation visualising that and explaining that.
Please, because it seems to me like we're still going to be sending more money out in the short term, and therefore need to make more provision for that.
There is still, because we did these calculations, there is still a net benefit to the council. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done the adjustment. But happy to have a separate conversation.
Councillor excuse me, Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Seeing as you let the genie out of the bottle in terms of letting us contribute, I think one item, with all goodwill, that we didn't manage to answer in Mr. Bain's supplementary was potentially around re-looking at the governance around some of these big movements and changes. First of all, if you look at the experience of the past, the failure to implement what Council has agreed was an issue. And in our current delegation of authorities, I suspect we still have the potential for that to happen, and whether that's appropriate or not is not for me to judge. I think the point was well made that we should at least consider whether it is or is not appropriate and what the mechanism is, because in my simple brain we need some kind of racy around this, of which I hope to just be informed, because a bit like Councillor Cope, my brain starts exploding when we get to this level of financing. But I do believe that we should have visibility of some of those big changes and an appropriate model. So more a reinforcement of Mr. Bain's point that relooking at the governance around the delegation authority is probably not a bad thing, given the amounts of money involved. Not to say we still wouldn't do it, and it's not the right thing to do, because I think Ms. Welsford makes the case there very well and very clearly, but we can always learn and we can get better, can't we?
And that's why I'm a fan of ISO 9001. Mr. Bain.
I know it's very irregular to come back, sir, but what I'm pointing to is risk for this council, and it's appropriate that we are the Audit Standards and Risk Committee, and I would just, if I was in the Performance Finance Scrutiny Committee, I would try and judge exactly what the outcome was under various scenarios, as I've outlined today, because I do think the council should have this under constant review. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Are we happy? Mr. Bain, you might like to stay and hear this one, if it's related.
It's more related to you, Chair, than
He's
anything.
gone.
I just want to say thank you for allowing the flow of discussion. I was at a Surrey County Council meeting today, and it was horribly awkward as members of the public trying to engage were cut off. So thank you for your professionalism in allowing the flow of a discussion. Thank you.
Openness and transparency. I believe in those. Annual government statement. I think this is you, Alex, isn't it?
Good evening, members. It's quite a lengthy report. This is an annual report that is complementary to the Council's financial statement and set of accounts. We have been presented with a few corrections and typos, so I'm hoping everyone's looking at the latest version of the AGS, because obviously it's had several iterations over the last few months, so hopefully you've got the latest version. Some things to point out as we go through the report. The AGS is reviewed by the Council's auditors, so BDO as well as Grant Thornton, and they will comment if in their view they feel the statement does not properly reflect the standard of governance demonstrated in the previous financial year. So I'm not sure whether, Steve, you are going to make any comments later if you've had a chance to review that, but that's just something to pick up. The Council operates a framework, a local code of corporate governance, which is consistent with the principles of CIPFA and SOLIS framework delivering good governance in local government. We've applied that very similar to other local boroughs across the country, so that's nothing different. The statement explains how the Council has complied with the code and also meets the requirements of Part 2 of the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015, which requires all relevant bodies to prepare an AGS. Even though I'm the author of the AGS, at the end of the day, it's the responsibility, I understand, of the leader and the chief exec to be happy with the content of the document so that they can sign it off. So that's what we're asking the committee to resolve. If I could just go through some different sections of the report very quickly, Chair. I think the most important part, well, one of the most important part of the document is the management assurance statements. That covers the bulk of the content in the middle of the report. So that's where we've consulted with all the service departments across the council, and we've asked them two specific questions. One is, can they identify any weaknesses in governance control over the 23-24 period and identify what steps they've taken to address those weaknesses in control. And we've also asked service departments to forecast and identify what particular issues or areas for consideration that they need to focus on, especially around governance, so financial governance, reputational risk, those sorts of things, for the 24-25 year. So what we need to bear in mind as we're going through the document, it is mainly a reflection of the 23-24 performance of the council in terms of the governance, but we have asked services and consulted with them to identify what they consider to be issues going forward. So that leads me on to the last table. So it's on starts at page 32 for me. I'm not sure where it sits on the agenda, but it's 32 on my report. So we've asked CMT to identify 6 particular issues for the 24-25 financial year. The first one was the preparation of elections in 25, including the county council elections in May 25 and any by-elections. That was the first point of issue. The second one was to consider the progress of the CGR of the Windlesham Parish Council. The third issue, obviously the council's facing significant financial pressures, and we need to ascertain in this report and identify how we're going to maintain a sustainable budget or try and achieve a sustainable budget in compliance with the medium-term financial strategy up to 2028. The next issue, the council's experienced higher than preferred staff retention. So we've introduced a people strategy, and we're obviously rolling out the council's transformation programme, and a key part of that is looking at how the council's managing its recruitment processes and retaining staff, especially in light of financial pressures that we're dealing with at the moment. The next issue covers the publication of the new National Planning Policy Framework 2003-2024 and proposed planning reforms. And we got some narrative against that from the head of planning. And the last section covers continued development of risk management processes. Obviously, risk is on the agenda for this particular committee. And we've recently introduced a risk appetite, which obviously went to the last audit committee, didn't it? And we're looking at making sure that every service department has got a robust risk assessment, and they're actually working and delivering their risk assessment. So I think, Chair, at the moment, those are the key issues. I could go on, but it's a lengthy document, so I think I'll pause there and happy to take any questions at this point.
Thank you, Alex. Members.
Thanks, Alex. Obviously, in the last couple of days, there's been quite a lot of talk about potential unitaries in Surrey. I'm just wondering whether that needs to feature somewhere in this document. Obviously, I know it's only the last couple of days that it's sort of been in the press, but it seems to be being pushed forwards. And are there things that we as a council should be doing to smooth the transition if that is indeed where the government takes us?
Thank you, Councillor Cope, for the question. Obviously, in terms of recency of the topic and the narrative, it's very difficult to obviously include this because this document was probably first drafted back in the summer, so it's gone through various versions. But it's certainly something that I'm just wondering whether there's any merit to including it in this one, or whether there's any process in including it in the next year's AGS, given the timing of this particular report. But I'm not sure what platform that best sits in terms of having that conversation with senior council officers and committee, given the recency of what you're talking about.
Thank you, Alice. We did have this sort of conversation in the previous council. It was all the rage, and then it died away. Maybe it won't die away, but, you know, Councillor Hawkins, I think, was very much against taking the action because it was only in discussion. And the discussion came to nothing, but we will have to wait and see. So maybe at the next meeting, keep an ear open.
I've made note of it anyway to to take your opinion.
Councillor Rakes.
Thank you. Ooh. Wrong name on there. Never mind. Excuse me. I just wanted to double check. I think I know what you mean on the 6 things you mentioned. One of them was the staff retention. And it says experiencing higher than preferred staff retention issues. So I'm assuming it's the issues, in other words, the problems of staff retention, which are higher, and not the staff retention level. Is that? I just want to be clear on the English there.
Thank you, Councillor. I think it would be fair to say they're both equally as important in terms of risks to the organisation at the moment. So, the transformation programme is partly dealing with ensuring we've got robust controls and systems in place to make sure we're retaining excellent, top quality staff that have already been recruited at the council. And the transformation programme is going to continue to do that. The issue we've got, obviously, as we go through the next couple of years, is trying to recruit suitably qualified of calibre staff to make sure we're actually delivering the council to the best of our abilities. Does that still not address your question?
I'm still not sure I'm clear, because the way just that it sounded as though we were retaining too many of the staff. So are you saying that we need to make sure we retain only the ones we want to retain and not others? Is that effectively what you're saying?
I don't think so, because we wouldn't have recruited the others in the first place, would we? So it's striking the balance, making sure that we got sufficient staff to deliver the council's strategy, as well as making sure we got suitably experienced and qualified and the right calibre staff to make sure that they're trained and developed and continue to work at the council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. It's just a small question about it's under Principle F, which I think is on page 12 of the AGS, page 14 of the supplement. The bottom paragraph, it's Surrey Heath is in the Surrey and Sutton business rates pool for 2023-24. So the paragraph and the one below it mentions 92.5% threshold, protected by a safety net. So can you just explain what that means? Does that mean the council retains 92.5% of business rates, or it doesn't? It loses 92.5%? I'm just not totally clear about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'm guessing this one's probably best covered by myself. What we have is a level of business rates that we are allowed to retain. So it's not what we collect. We pay over 50% of that to the government straight away. We pay another 10% of it to the county. And on the 40% that's then left, the government, in our case, give us a tariff. Once you take that tariff off, we're left with a figure. If our collection rate means we drop below 92.5% of that figure, we will then be held at that safety net level. So it's 92.5% of the amount we're allowed to keep after we've paid our tariff.
Right, thank you. Understood. Thank you.
Any more questions for Alex on this? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I've got pages 21 or 23 on the report I'm looking at. The section is entitled ICT. AI adoption, very important. Good to see it noted there in terms of driving through productivity, and is certainly something I think is key here for embracing for the future. So I think it's a good one to be mentioned there. And equally around cyber readiness, we've certainly seen a move in the right direction from our colleagues in tech, who are pretty much the glue that holds our business together. But I think it's good, one, to call out the sort of the steps forward that they're making, but equally there's quite a journey to go on there to get us to an ideal level. But all credit to the steps taken forward so far.
Thank you. No more questions? Thank you, Alex. I think we are invited to note the report, is that?
I think there were two parts, Chair. One was to note and to comment from members of the committee. I think the second part was having this mechanism in place to make sure if the committee are happy with the outcome of the report, for the leader and the chief exec to sign it. So that's the only thing that we need to address.
Is the leader happy?
Thank you, Chair. As Mr Middleton knows, it's the highlight of my life reviewing the annual governance statement, and I have to get through at least 2 cups of tea to give it proper thought and consideration. But to cut to the chase, it's a comprehensive piece of work. When it comes back to me in its final state, which I think is this one, I will read it again, and if I'm happy with it, I will sign it. Until I have to sign it, I won't do that final review. Thank you.
I believe our recommendation is that you sign it. Both of you. Thank you. Outstanding audit recommendations. This is you again, Alex. Members will remember this is the spreadsheet and how we're doing, and they drop off after 18 months and they're all done. So it's a rolling programme.
I think you said everything I needed.
So sorry.
No, so so just a couple of points to note then. So as the Chair said, it's an 18-month rolling programme. So the oldest ones that have obviously all now been addressed and implemented, they've dropped off the radar, so to speak. We're still operating the same classification system, so that hasn't changed in terms of essential, desirable and best practice. In practice, we don't really issue that many best practice recommendations, simply because in our view for internal audit, we feel most of those actually warrant a desirable status anyway, so we don't have too many best practice, but we still track their progress through time anyway. On a positive note, since working with service departments and heads of service since this report was last taken to committee, all the audit recommendations that have needed to be implemented have been implemented by the due date, with the exception of the 6 bid recommendations that have arisen from a revenues/council tax internal audit that was done about 18 months, 2 years ago. A quick update on that, as I understand it, the council's Director of Customer Services and Finance, as well as the Chief Exec, have recently held a meeting with the Chair at bid, and I understand that progress is now being made on those 6 recommendations, and I have updated the table to show what improvements have been made, but I'm happy to take questions on that later. All the other recommendations have since been actioned. There are a few you'll notice in the spreadsheet that are coming up for renewal or due by date. So they haven't progressed yet. There are 2 that I probably need to flag with you. They relate to parking. They're due at the end of this month, so they're actually quite time-wise critical at the moment. But the other ones not yet due, aren't due until the new calendar year, so they're less of a risk to the organisation at the moment. I've shaded out all the recommendations that have been actioned on the main body of the spreadsheet, so it allows you to focus on the white rows, which are those that are obviously still outstanding. And I'd just like to compliment, Chair, the hard work of heads of service and the teams to deliver the audit recommendations. It seems that the message is getting across to them that this progress report that goes to committee every time audit committee meets is actually having quite a desired effect in terms of actually focusing their attention on helping to address audit recommendations. Obviously, they have to complement that amongst the rest of their work programme, but it does seem to be having a good effect in terms of how many are still outstanding and how many potentially we have to escalate to audit committee. So that mechanism, hopefully, going forward will continue to work. But again, I think that's all I need to say at the moment, Chair. I'm happy to take questions on the report, or I can pass over any questions about the bid to Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Alex. Members, any questions? Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. On the spreadsheet, there's an information governance item, which is, to do with record retention. Let me find it again. The text is very small, so I've no idea. I don't have a number next to it on mine. So it is recommended that records retention and disposal schedule includes service areas such as facilities management, property regeneration, and the joint waste service. Can you tell me what that particular item means in terms of record management retention? Because it sort of refers to potentially retention and disposal schedule. So I was interested to see what the scope of that was.
Thank you, Councillor. So, from memory, as far as I can remember, the records retention and disposal policy, we've got to fit in with obviously the document management policy that the council holds. We already have a dedicated policy which service departments need to work towards. This particular schedule, we're asking services to identify all their records, so whether that's digital, in paper format or a microfiche, those sorts of formats, and then they need to understand how long those documents need to be retained for in compliance with DPA and GDPR, and then they need to have a mechanism in place to make sure that they've got a process to suitably and safely dispose of their records when they are no longer required or no longer needed for the purpose of their day-to-day business. But whilst carrying out that test, we found that 3 particular departments didn't have a schedule, as I pointed out there. So it doesn't necessarily mean to say they weren't adopting best practices when it comes to information governance in terms of disposing paper records or digital records, but they weren't able to demonstrate that was being adequately recorded in a schedule. So you've got like a formal process in place that internal audit could come in, or the council's information governance manager could go in and say, could you demonstrate your schedule to us so that we can see you complying with that and you complying with the council's record management policy.
So the schedule would be around the documents that they hold?
Yeah, so if you take internal audit, I would have identified all the records I hold to deliver my service, whether that's in paper, digital or microfiche form. And then I would put into the schedule how long those documents need to be retained for. So if it, for example, is an investigation record tends to be needed for a longer period than maybe a financial audit, which only may be required for 24 or 48 months. Investigations could last 6 to 12 years, for example, those sorts of things. So it would need to include that. It would need to include the location of where those documents are. So if it's a particular record, are they held in paper format in the council's archives? Are they held by any contractors, for example? Because there's obviously, if we're working with third parties or contractors, they might hold some of the records that that is owned by the council. So we need to be making sure we're working with those as well. And then the schedule needs to demonstrate that we're adopting best practices when it comes to making sure we're complying with the council's records management policy.
So, for example, with regeneration acquisition of property, you presumably retain the documents around that for the duration of the ownership of the property? That's a question.
Yeah, what's most suitable for the service department to make sure they can continue to deliver the business and maintain their working relationship with their contractors, yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't be for me to instruct them what records to hold and how long to hold them for, because at the end of the day, the service departments have the best information and have the best knowledge of what records they hold and how long they need to hold those records for.
That's good background, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
I think given what you said, someone's got to ask about the bid, because these items have been on here for quite a long time. You've said obviously the progress is being made. What's the end game? You know, when are we going to see these moving off this spreadsheet? When are we going to see these items resolved? Whether that means recovering all the levy or not? Can we get an update on what the nature of the progress is?
Mr. Watson, are you? Yeah, please.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I think what we've achieved in the last couple of weeks is the fact that we've now got the auditors that the bid were happy to appoint to come in. They've sent us their audit engagement letter and pricing schedule. We will sign that and send it back. They will come in, they will complete their work. Once they've completed their work, we'll have a independent version of who owes what to who, at which point in time, hopefully, both parties can then decide the process that goes forward around it. It may be that if, as I suspect, the bid probably owe us more money than we could possibly owe them, given what my own reconciliations have been done with my teams, it may be a case then whether this committee or a committee of the council wishes me to enforce the collection of that. I would suspect that if I did that, it would see the bid being wound up, and therefore that's a decision that's going to have to be taken at some point.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? No? Oh, sorry, Councillor MacDonald.
I've got two buttons. I keep pressing the wrong one. I'm sorry, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Watson. Could you just, from your experience and everything else, could you just confirm where you think that decision might be placed in terms of addressing the bid? Is that an executive function? I mean, at the moment, I suspect you're responsible for collecting funds. So if you weren't to do that, where would you get the authority not to do it, if you follow my logic from? Thank you.
So previously, we haven't raised an invoice against the bid, as I was asked or requested by both this administration and previous administration not to do so, for those very reasons about putting on there. Plus, we also wanted to do the audit to make sure we're in that position. At the point when we have the results of the audit from the independent accountants, I would present that to the Chief Executive and present to yourself and the finance portfolio holder, at which point we'll decide, would you like me to raise the invoice and would you like to pursue it? And potentially, if not, then we'd have to come as part of the write-off report to the executive that we bring twice a year, suggesting that the amount is not so much written off, because it's not actually written on yet, but just not invoiced. And that would be the decision-making process, is my view.
Thanks very much for clarifying. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That's all of those questions. Thank you. Alex, are we noting this report? I think we are. Yeah. So item 7, internal audit mid-year progress report.
That's me again, Chair.
That's you again.
Hopefully it's the last one for me. Okay, so in terms of context, members will recall at a previous meeting, I think it was asked, traditionally we would present one progress report which would come to the summer meeting, and that would identify or summarise the entire year's worth of work for the internal audit team. The one problem with that is the timeliness of that report. So if it comes to committee in the summer and it relates to maybe some key issues or some financial considerations that are worthy of discussion at this particular committee, if they related to an internal audit that was done 6 to 9 months prior to that report, then it's obviously not the most timely mechanism for members' input into that process. So I think it was a good point to know, and so that's the reason for this particular mid-year progress report coming to this committee. So hopefully the issues are more relevant now, and they relate to audits that have only been carried out in the last 2, 3, 4, maximum 6 months. So in terms of time-wise, if there are any critical issues that members want to note, then we can deal with them sooner rather than later. So in summary, the report provides the work programme internal audit for the first half of the year in terms of meeting the annual plan, as well as any ad hoc or consultancy activities that the internal audit team have included as well. So 7 internal audits have actually been finalised, and by finalised, that means the final reports have gone out, and we've agreed the audit recommendations with the heads of service for them to address. So those 7 audits are cash and bank, revenues or council tax, housing benefits, information governance, the parking service, safeguarding / sum of HR, and petty cash imprest accounts. So those are the 7 completed pieces of work, and there were 4, I would say, sort of like semi-chunky pieces of work that we weren't able to finish last year, that we had to carry forward some field work and issue the final report since April this year. Those namely are procurement, fraud, Camberley Theatre, and HR and expenses. So those are 4. Again, we've completed and issued the final reports for those. So the audit recommendation should flow through to the spreadsheet where we're tracking progress of the recommendations. So in terms of the actual weaknesses in control that we've identified, you've been furnished with the recommendations because they have popped up, or they should be popping up, in the overdue recommendations spreadsheet. A few audits in progress we've got at the moment. Treasury, we've completed the field work on that. We've drafted a draft report, but we haven't presented that or had the meeting with the finance team yet. Contact centre and customer services audit, that's mainly focusing on the council's new complaint system. So the Ombudsman has released what's called the Complaints Handling Code. That went live from April this year, and all local authorities are expected to adopt the main conditions within that handling code, if you're aware of those. So one of the criteria is every year we're supposed to carry out what's called a self-assessment against the council's complaints process. So we've got a formalised process in place, which is obviously dealt with initially by the contact centre team, but obviously most complaints are rolled out to service departments to deal with. We've moved from a 3-stage complaints process down to a 2-stage now, so we've only got stages 1 and 2, and should complainants still feel dissatisfied, then they can obviously appeal that to the Ombudsman, but it's supposed to make the complaint system a lot easier and more transparent rather than having 3 stages down to 2. So I'm currently looking at that as well. We're also working on creditors. We started the creditors audit 2 or 3 weeks ago, but that hasn't necessarily been populated into the report as well. So in terms of the audit recommendations, those 7 internal audits that we've carried out in the first half of the year, as I said, they've been populated on the spreadsheet, and we're currently working with managers to make sure those recommendations are actually actioned promptly and implemented by the due date, again, as much as possible. Information governance, there are quite a few recommendations, and I bullet pointed those because that's quite a key area for the authority. Likewise with procurement, because the new Procurement Act 2024 has come out, we need to make sure that we carried out a very robust procurement audit. We actually included more days than we should have done in the plan, just to make sure that the council's got effective and adequate procurement arrangements in place. So we've covered that off. So I think that's it at the moment, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions or issues that have arisen. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Members, any questions for Alex? Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you for your report. I Absolutely, I think you do a lot of work. So well done for getting through all of that. I think that's quite an achievement. Just more thematically, so I know you spoke earlier about actions being closed in a timely manner, which is obviously brilliant, but is there anything that across all of those different audits that you have completed or undertaking that speak to sort of generic themes to the culture of the organisation, or whether we're looking at openness and transparency or documented processes and policies, or the number of repeat items that you've closed them once but then it goes back to being undone again? Is there anything you can tell us about sort of that?
Thank you, Councillor. Off the top of my head, I think training and development is one common theme that seems to spread across a lot of audits we do. So there's obviously an issue with resourcing and staff having the time to spend on training, but that does to come out. We do cover making sure staff got the skills and expertise to deliver that particular service, whether it's theatre or parking, whatever. And training does seem to be something that's not always at the top of the radar, so that's certainly a common theme. The council's quite good at having policies and procedures in place, but the one risk of that is they tend to get out of date quite quickly. So I think as an authority, again, this crosses several of the audits. One of the areas we look at is making sure they've got robust written policies to help their services deliver that service and making sure staff know what they're supposed to be doing. So whilst generally we found they had policies in place, they weren't necessarily up to date and they didn't reflect the current practices of the council. And again, it's probably partly a resourcing issue because, if they're aware of policies there, they may not necessarily have the time to do that. So it's something that we're having to push with services when we do internal audits to make sure that their policies are being refreshed and brought up to date and certainly published as well in terms of transparency. There are a lot of policies that are on the council's website now, and we need to make sure those policies are up to date and reflect the current council's practices. Retention and recruitment of staff, as we alluded to earlier in terms of the council's transformation programme, that is a key issue. And it's a key issue for us to actually deliver internal audits sometimes because we need staff to be made available, or they certainly need to be available. And if services are running with vacancies or they've got staff off sick, that makes not only a problem for us in internal audit, but it's obviously a problem for them in terms of delivering their service. So that's another common trend that we notice across the board. I suppose another one would be the latest developments in IT and AI. So we're rolling out, we just recently most services are now working with Windows 11. We're migrating across from the Box documentation system to SharePoint, and that's created some issues with some services being able to obtain their records or making sure that those records have been adequately migrated across. And it's a problem for internal audit, for example, because once Box has been closed off with service departments, it's sometimes difficult for us to actually get hold of those records if they're no longer available. So it's something we've got to work with IT to make sure that they've got robust controls in place for that. But I think off the top of my head, those are probably the main common threads that stretch across the different service areas. Does that help? Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. Following up from that question and your answer, is there a standard audit standards and risk, a standard training section in everybody's annual appraisal, do you know?
Speaking personally, I think there is. We've got a template for the appraisal, so you identify all of the objectives, and there's one section in the appraisal document that talks about training and development. So individuals would work with a line manager to identify any training needs and how the council can support that individual in trying to meet those training needs, whether that's through webinars, face-to-face training. Obviously, the councils, we've got very good working relationships with Surrey in terms of Surrey Learning Programme, in which there's a lot of online and e-learning training and stuff like that. There's a specific section that just talks about safeguarding. So we've actually got a section in the appraisal document that talks about safeguarding and where services identify individuals that may need a safeguarding training or awareness, or they work with children or vulnerable adults, then those needs are actually properly addressed because that's one of the mandatory things. And so other mandatory things like data protection or information governance should be flagged or signposted within that process as well.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Any questions? Yes, Councillor McIntyre.
Sorry, Mr Middleton. I enjoy asking questions on your reports because they're good. So the Treasury audit that's currently in progress, in the blurb in the paper, you talk about reviewing cash flow. Is that a backwards look, or is that more about forecasting? And I ask because we've obviously spoken a lot about cash flow in this and other meetings on executive and performance and finance scrutiny. I know Ms Walsford is doing a lot of work on that at the moment. But I didn't know whether this contributed to that and was able to support that, or whether that was much more of a backwards-looking piece of work.
I think it's the former, because it's an area that finance have actually flagged up with us. So when we actually set the scene of our audits and we identify what the scope or the brief of those audits need to be, we actually work with the service departments to say, right, what are the key issues you want us to look at, rather than just look at the box standard and deliver the same piece of work we did the previous year. So actually, cash flow was actually one area that the finance managers approached us and said, can you work with us to deliver that? So I think it's more in terms of how the Treasury function and the income and expenditure, the income that it receives through interest, is actually how that moves across into the budget setting process, and how that filters into the cash flow in terms of identifying what potential cash flow is available, and especially in terms of the timeliness of that. So when investments mature, how soon do those transactions appear on the cash flow statement? And obviously that needs to inform the finance team to make sure that they're actually delivering their service. So to answer your question, I think it's more in terms of how we look to the Treasury function in terms of the investment being received, how that's filtering back into the cash flow now and in the future to help forecast where we need to be on the cash flow, rather than a retrospective look of how it operated in the past.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I raised some concerns in relation to the risk register around Treasury at the previous meeting, which was around, I think, a green risk rating. But we'd obviously got significant overspends in terms of the interest part of the budget, which seemed to come sort of as a mid-year. Is that part of the area that you would consider looking at around the Treasury audit?
I think we considered it, but I don't think we did any particular detailed testing on it in terms of transactional testing. So the transactional testing would have focused on making sure that our investments and borrowings were in line and complied with the council policy on those. But in terms of actually forecasting and identifying any future, what the shortfall is in terms of that interest being received or not as much interest as being forecast, I suppose that's more for the expertise of the finance team rather than the internal audit, because it's more a compliance type audit. So a lot of the testing related to how we made sure that the service was complying with the council policy and the prudential indicators that were agreed by committee several months ago, rather than looking at the particular numbers per se.
So things like loans maturing and then interest rate movements obviously going upwards would be out of scope for this particular audit?
I wouldn't say they would be out of scope, but we wouldn't do a deep dive into them, or we hadn't done a deep dive into them for that particular piece of work.
So you wouldn't be looking, for example, at where as loans mature, there would then need to be greater provision in the revenue budget to cover those interest payments. That's not something that would be within the audit?
It would be, because
Okay.
if it includes, if those elements or those areas have been covered by any management reports or committee reports, then one of the tests that we do in the Treasury audit is making sure that timely and accurate information is being presented by the senior management team and committee. So we'd actually review those reports that are being prepared by the finance team for accuracy and how they reflect against the council's
So,
water plan.
so they would be in scope in terms of the big increases in...
They would be, if that information was presented either
Or
correctly or,
not, as the
incorrectly,
case may be.
or not in those reports we would cover. But in terms of individual transactional testing, we wouldn't look at a specific loan, for example, and see how that particular loan affected the bottom line figure
But the
that's been
summary you
alluded to
would.
in previous meetings.
That's wonderful. Thank you. It was really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, we are noting and agreeing this report. Everybody happy with that? Thank you very much. Thank you, Alex. Go and have a glass of water. Item 8, Treasury Q2 Monitoring Report.
Thank you. So this report actually goes up to the end of October, just because of the timeliness of the meetings. I felt it was sort of more appropriate to bring up to date, so it's a little bit longer than a full quarter. And then obviously highlights the projected position for the full financial year. There isn't a huge amount different in terms of what we're projecting than what we were in the Q1 report. So the capital financing requirement is forecast to be 213 million at the end of the financial year. And paragraph 2.3 shows the split between internal borrowing and external borrowing. So each report we're kind of slightly enhancing the information provided to you. Currently have 178 million of external borrowing, and long-term debt is currently at 2.73%, but that was before we did the loan restructuring, because that would be a weighted average, and short-term at 5.08%. As discussed, mentioned it earlier with Mr. Bain's questions, we have restructured the market loan from an annuity basis to equal instalments of principal and at a lower coupon interest rate. So we have factored that into the projections. So currently it's 6.7 million projected for the year against a budget of 2.1 million. You're all aware from the previous report of the variation in that budget. We've currently got 20 million invested and projecting about around 700,000 projection of interest receivable for the year. We've included in this report more information for councillors on the CCLA property fund, which the key thing is to identify the gain, if you like, or the position since inception on both capital gain or loss, and the distributions received. I felt it was important because there's obviously lots of questions about the general property market. It's important to show that detail on this particular fund here. It does show that we have a very small loss in capital growth, but we have more than made up for that over the period in the distributions we've received, which are pretty standard each time. So that the way that's run. So I thought that was important for councillors to be able to identify that. And noting Councillor Wilson's previous questions on reporting the potential indicators, we are working on that and they will feature in a future version of the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Vicky? Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you. You've definitely taken into account a lot of the feedback with this report, and it's great to have it so timely, a 7-month version rather than just 6 months. So that's great. The CCLA information as well, I'd like to come back to a bit, but I really appreciate that because, as you know, I've asked about that in the past. And thank you for giving me a copy of the CIPRA Treasury Management Code of Practice, and it's got lots of recommendations. And I've searched through our constitution and they're there word for word, all of them. So that's really reassuring to see as well. I think my first question, then I'll come back to the CCLA property fund, because it does say in the Code of Practice that it's CIPRA's view that throughout the public services, the priority for Treasury management is to protect capital rather than to maximise return. And it can go down in value, the £2 million investment. I mean, it hasn't really, but it could do. So doesn't that mean that the capital is slightly at risk? And it's meant to be for a 3 to 5 year investment. And shouldn't Treasury be available, well, within 3 months, I think is the Treasury management strategy, but you've also said, within 24 hours really is ideal for that. And another point on the CCLA, it says in the report that it offers diversification of investment risk, but everything else in the Treasury is long cash. So, I mean, I guess it's a hedge against low interest rates or something like that, but doesn't the council already have quite a lot of hedge against low interest rates in its property portfolio? Thank you.
Yeah, the CCLA property fund is slightly different in terms of other property funds in that it's not a capital expenditure and capital income scenario. It has got exemptions from that. It is we kind of say any pooled funds, because there's a classification of types of investments. This one happens to be property. You can get multi-asset, equity funds, this kind of thing. So they are under UCITS pooled funds that you say on average 3 to 5 years to protect that volatility. Generally, councils invest in these type of funds for sort of the longer term cash that they always have. So things like we talk about in the reserves, so like your SPA money that you're not necessarily going to spend. So it kind of gives you some of that diversification. And if you had obviously, the banking crisis, I know we've had property crisis, it's kind of just mixing the portfolio up. Our portfolio is quite small generally, which is why most of it is in cash. But even the cash is sort of diversified slightly because you've got money market funds, you've got local authorities and potentially some banks and things like that. So it's kind of having that, the security liquidity yield from the SIPFA, that is, the portfolio as a whole. So we obviously set those parameters within the Treasury strategy. Some people would argue that cash isn't the most secure, so it depends how you look at things. So that's why we try and have a kind of a range of things to try and mitigate certain things. So for example, the money market funds generally have a 3-month time lag. So if interest rates crashed tomorrow back down to 0.5%, you'd be earning quite a good yield on the money market funds until that unwounds. Whereas if you then did more local to local or banks, it would fall straight away. So it's quite important to have that kind of slightly mixed portfolio, just to kind of get the best out of using your cash.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah, just to echo what Councillor Wilson said, thanks ever so much for the updated report. Couple of quick questions, if possible. Would it be fair to take... Oh, I actually see it's in the box on the side. No, I don't see it's in the box on the side. Would it be fair to look at the distributions from that capital fund and divide it by the 2 million to roughly work out the equivalent interest rate return? Okay, so roughly for members' benefit, it's 4.25% over the last couple of years. So that's broadly, I guess, in line with other cash options, which I think where Councillor Wilson was. One thing I didn't quite, well, two things I didn't understand. One was, and maybe I missed it, do we have a weighted average return for the investments in terms of an interest rate? And if we don't, could we have one going forward? That's one question. Maybe I'll stop there and not machine gun the questions all in one go.
Yes, and I can see it's not in here, so yes, we'll put that in. Definitely.
Okay, and then the second thing that is bugging me, I'm really sorry, is the money markets. We seem to have gone from 6 million to 18 million with a movement of 12 million. Is that movement because the markets have gone crazy, in which case, can you please let us know in future so we can all invest in whatever's going on? Or where did the money come from that's driven that movement? Because I couldn't see it on the other side. What am I missing? Thank you.
So that's the movement between March and October. So March, we're very low in cash because we've had your February, March 10-month council tax. So it will always be higher as you go through the financial year than it will be at the end of the financial year. We have done some sort of temporary borrowing. We know we're going to need it in the next couple of months, so we have done some now, which actually fortuitously we've been able to get better rates than what we could get today by quite a lot. So actually that worked out quite well. So that's why we're holding a little bit more cash, because we were fortunately able to take advantage, which we didn't really appreciate that it would be an advantage at the time. So that's why.
Thank you. So that'll probably even out over time. Yeah, thanks ever so much.
Thank you. Councillor Cope.
Thank you, Chair. The majority of the short-term borrowing comes up for renewal in the next couple of months. At what point do you start reaching out and seeing what interest rates are available on that? I mean, I note that it says it's going to be rolled at the best possible interest rate, but presumably some of that will be known by now. So I just wondered if we could get an update on what that might look like.
Yes, so some of that is already part of that cash in Councillor McDonald's question. So we do our cash monitoring in a couple of different ways, but in terms of when we think we can actually physically borrow, we do a daily cash flow for the end of the year with known cash flows that are going out and coming in, one of which will be maturities on our loans. So we have already covered the majority of those maturing loans. We've either agreed already to roll them over or taken other loans. For this time of the year, it's a bit more crazy than it normally is because we've had the budget and the US elections and that kind of thing. So everything's gone a bit uncertain. So rates between local authorities have gone quite high. So it's a case of just taking the opportunity. But I think we will look at what the PWLB are offering. Unfortunately, the gilt yields have all gone up as well. So it's a bit of a tricky one at the moment. But the short answer is we've already covered the majority of those borrowings. So we're constantly looking all the time at what cash we may need to the end of the financial year, throughout the financial year, talking to brokers every day, getting lots of market information and making some of those decisions up front.
Do I take from sort of reading between the lines that although interest rates have gone down, our short-term borrowing interest rates will not go down and may well go up?
So it's a little bit of a convoluted thing within the local-to-local market. So when you borrow from the PWLB, that's linked to gilt yields, which is more linked to the government. Local-to-local is more linked to base rate, but linked a little bit with reference to the PWLB. So some people will do that as opposed to, so they'll compare it a little bit. The other nuance with local authorities is the cash flows. So February, March, as I just mentioned, generally councils are cash poor because of the 10-month council tax. Districts in particular, when we pay our precepts over to the county council and the police, that doesn't follow the same cash flow as the council tax coming in. So that's why generally on February, March, we will pay over precepts, we don't necessarily get them in. So there's always a cash shortage in the last quarter of the financial year, which pushes rates up. And again, at the moment, we are in a position, it's hidden a little bit where, the last few months has been negative press. So that has increased interest rates a little bit and it has reduced the number of councils that will lend to us as well. So we've had to pay a little bit more. So it's not just the same as saying, well, rates have gone down. It does follow it to an extent, but there are kind of local, as in local authority factors that come into play as well.
Sorry, can I ask one more? So are we in a just generally structurally in a slightly worse position because so many of our maturities are towards the end of the year or into the early part of the year? Because you've said that is a time when local to local cash levels are low.
We've organised those loans already, so we were able to sort of use the market predictions about what interest rates are doing. If we were to try and borrow that money in March, I suspect March this year we'd be paying 6% or more. So the fact we've done it in advance obviously, we did it at a time when people thought interest rates were going to come down more than what they are now, so we were quite lucky. But even if we hadn't, and we were doing those now, it would still be higher. So the more you do it in advance, generally you can lock rates in at slightly lower.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Lee.
Thank you. I'll just start with a really quick question. It's 2.3, where it shows the CFR, which I think has gone up by about 3 million since the Q1 report, from 210 to 213. But I think the internal borrowing part of that has gone up from 32 to 35 million. Is that right? Is internal borrowing gone up? And given that reserves haven't gone up, how has internal borrowing gone up, if it has? Thank you.
So the internal borrowing is essentially the difference between your external debt and your projected CFR. So obviously that 178 million is as at now. That isn't necessarily a projected borrowing, external borrowing position. So come towards the end of the year, that will change. We could, obviously at the time I wrote that report, between now and having already sort of locked in some of that debt. So there is movement between those two figures, essentially. There will be.
Councillor Lee, then Councillor MacDonald.
Councillor Coates' question around interest rates was an interesting one. Obviously, in September, various advisors were predicting that interest rates would fall. And now in November, they're predicting that they're likely to rise. So I think it's almost a gambler's market at the moment. It's very, very difficult to manage that market. So I think we are, where we've been stitched up in effect with huge amounts of short-term borrowing, where we have to end up playing the money markets. I think if we'd all been back in 2016 and had to take a decision on whether we took out a fixed-term loan at a low rate or played the money markets, we may have considered playing the money markets if we were gamblers. But I think the Speaker's question right at the start was an important one, which was when those interest rates were at record lows. I think that's where the administration at the time should have embraced those record lows. We probably wouldn't be facing the challenges we face today. On to my question. So you mentioned £6.7 million in terms of interest payments versus 2.1, which I think was budgeted. Do we add on what's left of the interest equalisation reserve from the bit from the gambling to mean that it's 6.7 versus 3.8 in terms of defining the overspend?
We were already budgeting to use that interest equalisation reserve as part of the 2.1 million. There is some money left in there, so we will utilise. Sorry, I'm still on. So we will utilise the remaining to offset and other reserves to offset that. But it was already factored into the budget papers that we would use that 1.7.
And thank you for what you are doing around these challenges and the legacy that's been left to you by previous administrations. Thank you.
Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you. Just to build on what where Councillor Cope was going earlier, and I think it may have come up in a previous meeting, but my brain's a bit of a sieve today. I think there was some discussion about could we look to take medium-term kind of loans to maybe break this cycle a little bit. I don't know whether any work has been done on that yet, or when we might be able to take a view, because obviously we can see here from the start dates and maturity dates, broadly speaking, they're a year, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more, but should we be doing medium steps? I think was something that was discussed previously. Yeah, that was my question. Sorry, I said the same question twice.
Absolutely, we can, and I think we the sort of conversations we are starting to have. So today I compared the PWLB rates. The lowest point is about 6 or 7 years, whether you'd want to lock in at 5.2% or something for 6 or 7 years is a question. You might want to do a small bit. Local authorities do offer longer as well. So, some of those things are coming out as well. So, because we've got the transformation programme, we've got the property sales and all that kind of thing, so that whole thing will come out in the round as to actually, should we do some maybe 5-year borrowing to lock some of that in as well. So, yeah, it's kind of just part of the ongoing conversations and just look at what we're doing.
Thank you for forbearance, Chair. Yeah, so I think the message behind the message there is if the executive and other members get the strategy, then you'll worry about how you optimise the cash in the background. Yeah, that's what I think I heard. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Yeah, it's on the Link Group economic update and forecast. So I think it says they're going to produce another one in mid-November, or have produced another one, because the economic update, I think as you touched on, the world economy and the national economy has changed quite a lot since these predictions. It says 10-year gilt yield falling to 4%, and it's now 4.4%, and CPI was 2.3% and rising. The pound's down against the dollar quite a lot in the last few weeks, so that's inflationary. The budget was inflationary. The government's budget was inflationary as well. And if the new American president brings in tariffs, that's going to be inflationary. So interest rates probably won't fall as we thought they would just a couple of months ago in this update. Have you got the latest update from Link Group? Have they produced it? And do you know what's going to be in it? Thanks.
I haven't seen it. I don't recall seeing an email coming saying they'd updated it. We did have a strategy meeting with them last Monday, and they said they're discussing it in-house and what have you. So I'm eager to see it myself, so we know what to start putting into projecting to the budgets as well. So yeah, I haven't seen it as yet.
Thank you. Councillor Coe.
So it's just a very quick one and takes us back to Mr. Bain's comments earlier. In terms of the market loan changes, have those actually happened? Because I see in the appendix it still shows the old maturity and interest rates. So has the change already happened?
Yes, slight me being a bit eager by putting it into the words when the date of it wasn't quite in the timing around this. So I've mentioned it in the report, but that table does need to be updated from the date that we've actually done it.
Okay. Any more questions? No? Thank you, everybody. Are we noting this report?
Noting it effectively, yeah.
Okay, and everybody's happy and we've noted it. Thank you very much. Item 9, normally at the end of the meeting, but there is another one to come and it might take a bit longer, and the work programme is only 1 page. Can we get that out of the way now? Any questions regarding the work programme? Excellent. Thank you. Work programme is noted. Thanks, Alex. Item 10, external auditors' reports. Weighty document. Bob.
Well, I'll just do a really quick, sorry, Bob. Really quick introduction that obviously this is long awaited and also much discussed. So we've got BDO Steve Bladen here tonight that's going to present the reports, but just as a quick introduction, this report covers all the outstanding audits as per the government's statutory backstop dates. I'll get it in there first before Steve does. We're actually the first BDO client to take this through committee, so Ooh, we're doing well on that one. So this covers 1920, 2021, 21-22 and 22-23, all of which are going to be disclaimed. And now I'll hand over to Mr. Maiden.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vicky. So I'll just give some brief context first. So back in September 24, the government laid a statutory instrument in Parliament which introduced a statutory backstop date, and that essentially meant that by the 13th of December 2024, all audits up to and including the 22-23 year had to be finalised by auditors, so there had to be an opinion issued unless there was a matter relating to laws and regulations outstanding or a material objection. Now, we don't have any of those matters outstanding for our audits of Surrey Heath Borough Council. There's been a recognition for some time that the introduction of a statutory backstop date would result in auditors issuing disclaimed audit opinions on historic sets of accounts, and really that's in order to enable the sector as a whole to return to more timely financial reporting. So I appreciate that's not what members would want, it's not what officers would want, and it's not what we would want, but I think there's a recognition that I think currently there's around 700 sets of financial statements across the local government sector that are outstanding. So the only way that you can return to more timely financial reporting is to kind of close off some of those older audits. So that's kind of some of the background as to why we are where we are. In terms of, so as Vicky has already said, we do intend to disclaim our audit opinion on 4 sets of your financial statements, so that's 1920 through to 2022-23. In doing so, we have considered the guidance that has been published by the National Audit Office and endorsed by the FRC. So even though we are issuing a disclaimed audit opinion, there are certain procedures that we still have to do on those financial statements. So those have been completed, and the results of those are set out in the reports that are before you this evening. Essentially, they're around things like setting a materiality level, confirming our independence, undertaking a very high-level review of the financial statements, making sure they cast and cross-cast, etc. But it's a very limited amount of work that we have done on those. And that's set out in those reports that we have brought to you. I think it is worth reflecting that although there's 4 reports, they are very, very similar, so there's no significant differences between each of those years. In terms of the 1920 financial statements, those members that have been on this committee for a while will know that we had previously undertaken a reasonable amount of work on those financial statements, and we had given progress reports to this committee on the progress of those audits. But unfortunately, the introduction of a backstop date and a statutory backstop date means that we're not able to conclude that audit in the way that we would want to, and hence that's why we are going to be issuing a disclaimed audit opinion. The other report that before you tonight sets out our value for money work or our use of resources work, and that report actually covers 3 years, so the period from 2021 through to 22-23. The revised code that came in on the 14th of November this year allows auditors to do that, so it allows us to issue 1 report covering 3 financial years. Based on the work we've completed so far, there's no significant weaknesses that we're bringing to your attention. We have highlighted the Council's financial position within that report, though, and recognise there needs to be a focus on the Council addressing some of the matters that you've spoken about tonight. I think the only other thing I'd draw attention to in our report is the letter of representation. so it's attached as an appendix to our report. We still need the Director of Finance and the Chair of the Audit Committee to sign that to enable us to issue our opinions on those financial statements. And I think it's also worth noting that in order for us to issue our opinions, the Council will need to approve the financial statements for those 4 years. And I guess in terms of, while we're not able to give assurance because we haven't completed an audit, I think it's worth reflecting that the Section 151 officer will have confirmed that in his view, they give a true and fair view of the position of the Council. Probably leave it there, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do any members have any questions? Councillor Cope.
I just wanted to ask a question about process, because I'm conscious that I've had this audit for sort of less than 24 hours, so I haven't really had sufficient time to consider and digest it as much as I would like. What are we as a committee doing with this? Is this going to come to full council and be sort of properly discussed by everyone, or is this the only time that this is going to be discussed by councillors?
It would just be to this committee. This committee is delegated to approve those. It doesn't, the statement of accounts don't go to full council.
Well, I mean, I don't think I can vote in favour of approving this audit on the basis of 24 hours when I've got a full-time job and I haven't had enough time to review it. I can't vote to approve this.
Councillor Lee.
I think it's also the skim reading I have done of it, looking at one of the documents, it's almost, did someone from Private Eye help me write it? Because it tells me to go and refer to page 18, like they do humorously at the start of their document, and page 18 doesn't exist in the document. So, you know, do we need to call Private Eye in to help us find page 18? In another one, we're called XYZ Local Authority. Have we changed our name? Am I unaware of this?
I think.
And there's 4 kisses in another one. We can't.
The
24 hours
the
notice
version that
is
you're
not sufficient.
Talking about was sent out, but it shouldn't have been. The actual report, which I circulated by email when I got it lunchtime today, it's not the one with the insert. What's it here?
It's still wrong.
I'm confused then, because I've just gone to the public website. I appreciate, obviously, if documents are coming into the council thick and fast, it must be really tough for officers to try and keep track of what's going on. But you would hope that until it's the final version, there's a little banner that I know officers do on important documents to say it's a draft. I think that would probably be quite important from an audit perspective to know what versions are where.
Yep.
So, in terms, if there was an incorrect version was provided to the council, that was corrected. So, so I think the council has the final version that has those errors corrected about the XYZ. But certainly, if it hasn't, then we can re-provide that. In terms of the document itself, I don't think the council needs to approve our audit reports. They're for you to note. That's setting out what our opinion on the financial statements will be. It's setting out what work we have undertaken to give those opinions. I don't know that the council actually needs to approve the reports that we are giving to you.
Yeah, but that is my understanding. It's the signing of the letter that is the key thing. Is it not? And there is a copy of the text of the letter from you, no, from us, yes, to you, entitled Financial Statements of Surrey Borough Council for the year ended 31st of March 2020. and it's 5 pages long, looking at it double-sided, to be signed by Mr. Watson and myself. Is that the correct? Yes. And that's the legal thing, so you'll be glad you're sitting there. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a question about the 1920 accounts, and you said they're disclaimed because you had to rush finishing them because of the backstop, but work's been going on these accounts for 4 years. So why was the backstop such a problem? Isn't 4 years enough to finish the audit on 1 year's accounts?
So there was a number of issues as to why we weren't able to finish the audit on those accounts. So there was, in terms of the accounts that we originally received, there was a number of issues that were identified with those. Some of that was around how the JPUT was incorporated into the council's accounts. That took a number of, it took a long while to resolve, and unfortunately, while we would have liked to have then gone on to finish that audit, the backstop date just means that we aren't able to complete the procedures that we need to complete in order to give that opinion by the 13th of December.
So how much longer would it have taken to complete the 1920 audit?
It's difficult to say when you've not completed the work, but it would have taken several weeks of work to get that done, and we just are not able to complete that by, as I say, the 13th of December.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just ask one more question then. So all of these accounts, all 4 years are disclaimed. How would you describe the assurance that this committee can have?
Well, in terms of the financial statements, then the committee's not getting any assurance because we're not giving any form of opinion over those accounts, unfortunately.
Councillor McIntyre.
You just referenced it'd probably take another few weeks to do the work, but I think you confirmed in a previous ASR that you had these final version of the statements with all the amendments from previous work in January this year. So that extra few weeks that you would have to complete it, which particular balances are you struggling to confirm?
So there's a number of balances where the work that we have done would not enable us to conclude on the audit. So I mean, I think the fact that we are issuing a disclaimer of audit opinion means that there isn't any balance where I can say that we can give you assurance, because that is the nature of a disclaimed audit opinion, I'm afraid. There's underlying reasons for all of that. So, for example, we would need to do some additional testing around journal entries, and that kind of underpins all of the work on all of the financial statements. So in the absence of being able to complete that, we can't give assurance over anything in those accounts, hence the disclaimer.
So just to be really clear then, so there are no line in the financial statements you can give assurance on at all, and you still need to do work on every line to be able to do that. And therefore, going forward as a council, what assurance are we taking from any of the work? You've got to do a value for money statement, and everything that's written that's been presented tonight in the reports all seems really quite positive in terms of the narrative. I'm struggling to reconcile statements like the reserves are fine, we're happy, there's sufficient to go forward in the MTFS, versus we cannot give assurance on any line of the financial statements.
I think there's a difference between the work that we do to be able to give a value for money, to undertake a value for money review. So it's limited to two particular areas. So it's looking at your arrangements around governance and your arrangements around financial sustainability. Whereas to give an audit opinion, a true and fair audit opinion on the numbers that are in the financial statements requires us to do the kind of standard that we would work to is a lot more in depth than simply looking at your arrangements and identifying whether we think there's any significant weaknesses in those arrangements. I think just to hopefully maybe answer one of your questions, and forgive me if I don't, but in terms of assurance that you could take forward, then unfortunately the only way that you could have taken assurance forward into the audits that GT will do would be to have an audited set of financial statements on the 22-23 year, because those financial statements would then form the opening balances of 23-24, which Grant Thornton will be looking at. So even had we been able to complete 1920, I think the assurance that would have been available to Grant Thornton from that would be very limited, because there are 3 intervening years where you would still have had disclaimed audit opinions.
Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of different points. So just to pick up the issue Councillor Cope raised, I think that's 3 times I've been in agreement with you this evening, so that's a record. Put it down in your notebook. The original reports came in less than 24 hours before this meeting. Is that my understanding? And then an update within 6 hours or something of this meeting. Is that broadly correct? Am I in the right place here?
The one that arrived early was not an update of the other one. It was complete.
Okay. So clearly I can only empathise with the frustration of the committee in that, because it is quite dense, e.g. lots of pages and small fonts. I'm not entirely convinced from the residents of Surrey Heath's point of view there's a huge amount of value in it, which I think the members of the committee have commented on in their own subtle way. But what I'm concerned about is how much are we paying for this lot? And when I see in one of the pages to be confirmed, I get shivers down my spine. Because, you know, I was out on the bounds of Lightwater and West End today, and I may have come across somebody, and tomorrow it might be Windlesham or it might be Lightwater. It definitely won't be Bagshot, because we don't have a bridge to get there. And if somebody says to me, £95,000, Councillor MacDonald, for year ending 2019, what are we getting for our money here? And I suspect that's before we do the to be confirmed, and I'm not even sure about the future years, whether I've missed other numbers.
I think the question of the fee is to be decided by the authority, PSAA. Yeah. We have an input into that process, like, oh no. But, you know, it is not within our gift. Would that be true to say?
Thank you, Chair. Potentially, yes, it is in our gift. The audit firm, BDO, will submit their audit fee proposal to PSAA. PSAA will write to the council and asking, do we agree it, or are we able to challenge it? And therefore put a challenge in. We can then put a challenge in if we feel it's justified.
You've had a go at Councillor Rakes.
Yeah, Sorry. I just wanted to clarify a point Councillor McIntyre made. I as a neophyte, ended up chairing this committee last December the 15th, when unfortunately Councillor Betton was ill. And you actually said to me that, confirmed to me on December the 15th last year, that on October the 6th, you had got all the information you needed. So just to clarify the timings on this, it is only just under 14 months since you said you'd got everything from us at that point, with the proviso that there might have been new things. So just to put that in context. Thank you.
Sorry, there were other hands. Councillor McIntyre.
I was, Councillor MacDonald stole my final question about fees, so thanks. I just wanted, when we do that challenge, I'm assuming that, because I'm sure we are going to challenge on the fees, I'm assuming that there will be a record of what's been done, what work's been done, like in my world, normal financial services audit, where you've got a fee agreed and then you can go back and forwards based on output. So I'm assuming that is part of the process. If it's not, I would like to recommend that we do make that part of the process insofar as we can influence the PSAA.
I'm sure that's going to happen, yes. Steve.
Can I just clarify something on the fees, if that's okay? So, so the position that Mr. Watson outlined is broadly correct. So certainly in terms of any 1920 fees, the process of us submitting something to PSAA will be approved, subject to Mr. Watson's agreement, and PSAA have the right to review our work as well, so they can make a determination that way. In terms of the fees for those audits that are backstopped, again, just to give a bit of context, so PSAA will set the fees for those audits. Now we, as I've already said, the work that we've done on those accounts is fairly limited. What we have done is set out for PSAA the work that we would do to be able to give a disclaimed audit opinion on those accounts, and PSAA are in the process of reviewing that. From what I've seen, something has come out from them earlier this evening. I think it's likely to be January before we're able to confirm what those fees are, but as I say, they are being set by PSAA.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Cope.
Thanks. Yeah, just a short question for Mr. Bladen. You make forward-looking statements in the value for money statement. So for the final year, 22-23, when you made these statements, had you seen the draft accounts for 23-24 at all? Because the statements are forward-looking and the draft accounts have got significant changes to reductions in negative variances in reserves. Did you have that in mind when you made the statements?
So in terms of the statements we've made, they're broadly coming from medium-term financial strategy documents that we have reviewed and budget setting papers. We can have a look. We've still got another couple of weeks where we can have a final look at 23-24, and we will do that in light of the comments made.
Councillor Cope.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, probably more one for you. The covering statement says that this audit report contains matters that should be properly considered at full council. Can we set up some sort of mechanism once we've had opportunity to properly digest this, so that we might be able to feed anything in that arises?
I think the mechanism for these kind of things is the minutes of this committee go to full council for approval, and any issues would probably be raised then. I'm not a constitutional expert, but I think that's probably the way it would happen. If that seems sensible to you, it seems sensible to me, especially as I've got to sign the thing. Yes. I have a question of one or two, but I'll just ask the one for the moment. Talking about the financial statements preparation in your report, our audit of the Council's 2018-19 financial statements, which were prepared during the 2019-20 financial year, identified a large number of misstatements. Okay. And then in the conclusion, it says, we recognise that the Council has taken steps to improve capacity within its finance team. Is that referring to the finance team back then or now?
Now.
Okay. So this 2019-20 report is talking about the state of the Council now in that context.
So yes, so it's talking about over the last 4 years, because that's the period of time that the audit has been going on. So over that time, the council has
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
It's because this is so long ago, and we've had so much happening in between that getting the comments into the right year in relation to what you're auditing is important for me as someone who's going to be responsible for it. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to be a little bit colloquial again, but we are here to represent our residents, and I want to make sure I haven't missed anything, because I can be a bit simplistic sometimes. But my view is from reading these reports, we've spent a lot of time and energy in engaging a third party to give us assurance. We're not getting any assurance. And we're spending our residents' money on this because we're obliged to, because central government has set it up that way. Is there any nuggets that we can take out of this, that we can say to our residents, this was a worthwhile exercise? Or do we just accept the fact that we're at the beginning of the end and leave yourself, Chair, with Ms. Watson to bring it to an end?
Personally, I think the latter. If you look at the special reporting powers and duties, we are required to report, this is BDO, if we have been unable to satisfy ourselves that the annual governance statement complies with the requirements of the SIPFA LAS Code of Practice, blah, 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 blah. Comment, we have been unable to satisfy ourselves that the annual governance statement complies with the requirements of SIPFA. It doesn't help. And a lot of the things that I've highlighted, there are, we were therefore unable to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence in respect of the risk. It's all the way through the document, that phrase, sentence. So in terms of giving reassurance, it doesn't, does it?
No, it doesn't. I don't disagree with you. It's a disclaimed audit opinion, and therefore it is not giving you any assurance. I don't think there's any other way I can say that.
Yeah. Thank you. Rob.
I'll just have to say what I see. Thank you, Chair. I think there's two issues at play here. There's the awkward situation that we're going to end up with a disclaimed audit and no confidence. But there's also the plethora of errors and outstanding issues within the work that BDO has tabled. And I think we perhaps need to split those two apart. I'm not sure, with a short notice period and the number of mistakes in these documents, they were really acceptable to be tabled at this committee tonight. And certainly not at short notice. You would expect a short notice document to be borderline perfect. Councillor Cope and I sit on different sides of a divide on a variety of matters, but I think on this one, I think we both reasonably feel uncomfortable, and I think the leader touched on the importance there of this is not our money, this is public money that's being spent. These documents are just not good enough, I'm afraid. And I think I appreciate they're the first set, they should be the Rolls-Royce set. The first set of accounts coming from BDO to try and clear this mess up, they're just not good enough.
Councillor McIntyre, you were...
I was going to say something similar to Councillor Lee, but slightly differently. So I don't think, as a committee, we're able to really comment on the accounts, given that they came obviously quite late. I think that's unfair to be able to have as a formal record that we have seen them and commented on them. I think part of that problem is not knowing whether we can't rely on them because they're disclaimed or we can't rely on them because there are errors still in them. For instance, the materiality level on page 7 is 40 billion, which I'm assuming you didn't actually mean, as in the immaterial level. So in effort to move things forward on the basis that, does any committee member feel like they are happy? No. Sorry, I'm taking the chair role. We need to work through how we can comment post the backstop date. So obviously the 13th of December is a statutory backstop date. Maybe we can take that outside of the actual process on the basis that I still think we would all want to comment on it anyway, whether that's an executive function which we can do through the executive or council, I don't know. But I think we also need to make sure the minutes state that we feel uncomfortable commenting on the content, and we do need a final set of reports that are error-free so we know what we're commenting on.
I agree, but I don't think, I think this is it.
I'm sorry,
having sat in this chair for 4 years and had explanation after explanation, promise after promise, and we are still getting an incomplete audit, I do not see anything happening after the statutory requirement of a disclaimed audit report is presented of getting anything else. Just reality.
I don't disagree with that point at all, and I'm not suggesting that any more work's done by BDO, but surely a professional services organisation that has many clients across a wide jurisdiction would want to have a correct report that doesn't have 40 billion in it when it means 40,000.
Possibly. Councillor Cope.
Just so I'm clear, I mean, obviously we've got this backstop date of the 13th of December. Is the statute basically that we have to accept any disclaimed audit provided by an auditor, i.e. we have no pushback? So from BDO's point of view, they can just put anything in front of us. I'm not saying that you did, but they could just put anything in front of us and we have to approve it.
Ultimately, what they've put in front of us is their opinion of a disclaimed accounts, and that is what effectively you are endorsing tonight as a committee that we were having disclosed accounts, and that's part of the accounts and audit regulations that have been passed as secondary legislation by the government.
So just to be clear, we're endorsing the principle of having disclaimed accounts. We are not endorsing what is in this document.
So the accounts and what the accounts and audit regulations require is for the council to approve its accounts, and then we issue an opinion on those accounts. So I'm not asking you to approve our opinion. In effect, I'm telling you what our opinion is on those accounts. I don't require you to approve that opinion. But we have determined that there's a statutory backstop date. We're unable to complete the work that we would need to complete on those accounts to give an unqualified opinion, and therefore we will disclaim our opinion in line with the legislation that the government has put forward. So I think there's a subtle difference. The council has to approve its accounts. It's for us to issue the audit opinion on those.
Councillor McIntyre.
So I've got no problem with the process of the fact that the financial statements are presented. It's your opinion. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for two things. One, that we get an error-free set of reports for our formal records, which I think you suggested earlier on, if the reports that have been sent in had errors in them, you'd correct them. The second point is, just so that we can have a discussion about what's in the reports, because we haven't had sufficient time to be... We're here to provide something, right? Otherwise, there'd be literally no point in spending the last hour talking about it. So I would really value somewhere within our constitutional process that we can review the documents that we've been presented, not to approve, not to sign off, not to go back to BDO and challenge on, just so that we can have the opportunity to formally state or take learnings from or challenges from. Because I don't think, having been presented something, for us to then say as a committee, well, they came late and they've got loads of errors in it, but never mind, we'll just park them over there, is a particularly good use of anyone's time.
I agree. Councillor MacDonald.
In a desperate bid to try and move us on, in the spirit of Councillor McIntyre, is there an opportunity to take the updated error-free report to full council for a brief discussion led by the members of the audit committee? I'm not keen to comment on it further. To allow to be done exactly what Councillor Cope and Councillor McIntyre alluded to, so that we're seen to give this due diligence, which obviously the committee hasn't had a chance to do. That hopefully will allow you to, and Mr Watson, to do your thing with Mr Bladen in terms of the mechanics of the process, which doesn't require the committee's support. And then we draw a line under this saga of gargantuan proportions.
The point I made earlier about the minutes going to council, I mean, normally what happens with minutes in the council, somebody stands up, I second these, well, sit down, everybody will be fine, thank you very much. On this occasion, is it not sensible for, me to stand up and say, I submit these minutes, however, you might want to discuss them? Because surely the council has the ability to discuss and comment on any minutes it is being asked to approve. Just as a thought, And then that would bring in other opinions. It would be a difficult job for the mayor, obviously, but... Councillor Lee.
Can we not, in terms of this recommendation, amend it to say this committee is dissatisfied with the BDO reports because they're full of factual errors and cannot agree them and cannot approve them? It's a statement of fact. And it puts them on record that they're inadequate if we're not going to get another version, and they're factually incorrect, so we don't support them. I'd look to officers to put a legitimate form of words together, but that would presumably be reasonable, and then when it comes to full council, it's on record that there are problems with the documents. If BDO are able to table something in the meantime, that's fine. If not, perhaps they'll end up in a copy of Private Eye, which is, I think, where it's heading at the moment, to be honest with you, unless they're corrected. Given we're the first, it's the sort of thing that they quite like to pick up.
Do you have any comment you'd like to add? No? Don't feel obliged. David, do you want to speak? Whitcroft?
Sorry, yes, if you can hear me okay.
I'll call you. We're discussing at the moment, but if you do, I'll bring you in, okay?
Yeah, fine, thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Yep. It's confusing, I think, for me as well, where we are. The committee's not being asked to approve the accounts. That falls down to, unfortunately, myself, to state they are a true and fair view, which will be what I do when I have a look at it. We've already published them in draft format already, where we believe they are a true and fair view at that time. Then they would be audited by the external auditors generally, and if necessary, changes, adjustments made to those accounts, and they would then be agreed as a more true and fair view following the audit. So I'm not sure that's what the committee are been asked to approve, the accounts. That's would be standard even with a set of unqualified accounts with an unqualified opinion, because with the best will in the world, it's not the job of this committee to audit the accounts. It's the job of the auditors to audit the accounts to the best of their ability within the time frame allowed. Hence, because of the backlog that's built up over the whole of local government, and I think the latest figure, there's about 775 outstanding sets of accounts that are likely to be disclaimed over the next couple of weeks. The committee is also not being requested to agree the audit disclaimed opinion, but to note the fact that the auditors have made a disclaimed opinion on the accounts that we have presented as a true and fair view in our unaudited state. I think, and I probably need to take Democratic Services advice on that, and probably need to come back to you, that it's worth noting in the minutes, certainly, the concerns around the opinions on members of this committee, and certainly justifiable and potentially very valid concerns. I do believe that, I'm sure Mr. Bladen will agree, he will provide us with a final corrected version of his audit report. I think that was always on the intention anyway between now and, I suggest, the council date rather than the actual backstop date. It's only 2 days closer. I think council's on the 11th of December, which would therefore allow the minutes to state that the concerns that were raised during this committee and potentially allow a discussion at council if required. I don't know the full democratic services process there, but I think if it is raised at council, then it would have to be discussed at some point in time during that meeting around it. But to be clear, the committee's not being asked to agree the accounts, and they're not being asked to agree the audit statements, but to note the fact that a disclaimed opinion has been provided by BDO at this point in time, recognising that it probably needs to be reproduced in a corrected format. Once we get those in, I'm quite happy that myself or Ms Walsford will share them with all members of the committee and other councillors as necessary. Hopefully that will give us something we can latch on to tonight.
Yes, thank you. It's helpful. Councillor Whitcroft, you've been very patient. Thank you.
Not at all, Chair. Thank you. I hope you can hear me okay. Clearly, this is a very sorry situation that the council finds itself in. This would be a serious position to be in if we were talking about an audit of last year's accounts or even the accounts for the year before. But we're not. We're talking about accounts that go back further than that, I think to 4 years, in fact. I sympathise with you, Chair, and indeed the rest of your committee members, because you're put, it seems to me, in a totally impossible position. And the reason for that is that in the past, councillors have used the auditor's view of the year-end balances as a, if you like, a fixed point of in which they can place their confidence. And indeed, not only have councillors placed their confidence in those audited balances, but so have, if I could describe our resident who addressed your committee earlier, Mr. Bain, as a critical resident, as somebody who's concerned about the finances of the council. Mr. Baines and others like him again rely on the figures which are confirmed by independent auditors to understand where the position or the financial position of the council lies. And in the situation that we're in, we don't have that now. So, if you'll permit, maybe I'd be interested to know from BDO how we proceed from here. How do we have, as councillors and indeed as residents, confidence in the balances which affect not only 1920 but the years up to last year. And if BDO can't answer that question, I don't know whether officers and might have some suggestions as to where we're going to get those confirmed balances from. Sorry to ramble. Thank you.
Thank you. Who'd like to?
I can certainly start. So one of the reasons that there is a backstop date is to enable auditors to move on to what, as quickly as possible, what is the latest set of financial statements, because that's what's an audit's opinion over the latest set of financial statements is what is going to provide the most assurance to stakeholders. So whether that's local residents, other stakeholders. The only way that you can get to that latest set of financial statements is to, if you like, to clear away the previous audits. And that's why there is a statutory backstop date for those audits, with an expectation that there would be disclaimed audit opinions over some of those earlier years. So there are also statutory backstop dates for later sets of accounts. So there's a backstop date of the end of February for 23-24, and then a later backstop date for 24-25. Clearly, it will be Grant Thornton that come in and audit 23-24 and later years. And I don't know where they are up to with their audits. But that's where the assurance for stakeholders is going to come. It's by those later audits, but the only way that you can get to those is by closing off those earlier audits.
Thank you. In terms of, yeah.
Chairman, could I come back on that, please, very briefly?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. If we follow that logic to its natural conclusion, I think what we're actually saying is that if we can just cast aside the last 3 or 4 years figures, then why on earth do we need an audit in the first place? Why on earth do we need to go through this process in the future? Because it seems that if we're in a situation where, and I understand the problems which exist in terms of the workload, if you will, that are on national, local government auditors. But nonetheless, if we're just going to clear all that to one side and sort of say, actually, we're just going to set that aside and we'll just go with the balances that we think might be right, then it does call into question the need for, or the very expensive need, I might add, for auditors in the first place. That's just a personal view. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Sean, you're bouncing up and down.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, so I think Councillor Whitcroft's made an excellent point. I'm not sure whether he heard the update previously from Grant Thornton on how we would rebuild assurance, but my understanding was we'll follow a asymptotic curve in so much as we'll get increasing insurance in the first year and then subsequent year and then subsequent year. And I think, broadly speaking, the gentleman whose name I've completely forgotten said about 3 years before we get back to where we should be, Councillor Whitcroft. But with increasing assurance every year.
Okay.
I just wanted to echo what the leader said. That is Mr. Wells, who's the audit manager, audit director at Grant Thornton, has indicated that we will have an opinion at some point in the new calendar year before the backstop date on the 23-24 accounts. It is certainly likely to be qualified on the opening balances, which is standard, I think, across everybody. It may even be disclaimed on the opening balances. But as you say, the process will then be to rebuild levels of assurance around the balances that are being presented on our balance sheet as a balance sheet date and the transactions that occur through the year. So gradually the historic unaudited part of the accounts will become smaller and smaller until it reaches a level of insignificant materiality. Okay. It will take some time and the government recognises that.
Thank you. Councillor Lee, you were stopped mid-flow.
That's all right. Always happy to give way to colleagues. I think in the words of Ian Hislop, if this is an audit, I'm a banana. Can I perhaps suggest a form of words to move us on finally? A number of people have helped me put these words together, so thank you for many people inside and outside the room. Committee record dismay that there are errors in the reports from BDO. Clear statement of fact. We request that they are amended to correct these errors, but accept that they are disclaimed and that they can decide not to correct these errors if they wish.
I think I've said already, but I'll say it again. I think I can see the word 1 million in one place. The side chart to the side has the correct figure, but I accept there's an inconsistency, and we will correct that. And if there are any other errors in the reports, we will correct those as well. We will provide a final version of all of the reports alongside the issue of our audit opinions.
I think if that is in the minutes, that will do the job. Thank you for your friends, whoever they are.
Send those words to
Yeah, you know, make you happy.
Appreciate that. You're welcome to include the banana reference if you like.
No, we'll staple it to a wall and make some money. I think there's little to be gained from carrying on much further. Thank you for your input. Thank you for coming. Not without, needs a bit of courage, I think. And that, I think, concludes the business of today's meeting, does it not?
Yeah, it does.
Yep. Thank you, good night, and have a happy Christmas.